Hi, this is Abul Hussain coming to you direct from London, the United Kingdom, and welcome to another episode of the SMMA Mastermind podcast, where we talk about how you can start or scale your digital marketing agency. Now, if you are watching this episode outside of our Facebook group, find the link above or below this video, or go to smmamastermind.com, especially if you are in the agency community. Now, I have got a very special guest who is going to talk to us about how you can build your book of clients. Her name is Kacie Goff, and she is the founder of Jot Content, an agency that specializes in creating compelling content for health and lifestyle businesses. Kacie, welcome to the show.
Thank you so much. I'm glad to be here.
Thank you very much for joining me. I know it's nice and sunny and just before noon where you are. For the people who don't know who you are, how about a little bit of an introduction?
Absolutely. I'm Kacie. About 3 years ago, I left my full-time job. I've always worked in the marketing space and decided I think I could do this by myself. And I started out just as a freelance writer. That was how I was referring to myself. And over the years, it's sort of scaled. Now I'm an LLC business called Jot Content. And a few years in, I'm really enjoying it. There have definitely been challenges, but there have also been ways that it's been easier than I expected to kind of set out on my own. So excited for anyone who's listening and kind of considering taking that step themselves.
Well, it's awesome and very brave for you to do something like that. Now, obviously, I mean, there are a lot of people out there who might be in the position that you were in three to 4 years ago, but they're not quite sure that they're ready to make the jump. So, what did you do in preparation to kind of go from being employed to, I suppose, self-employed?
That's a great question. And I had the luxury of sort of being able to ease myself in. And that's definitely something I would recommend people explore. I think there's kind of this mentality that if you're going to work for yourself, it's this giant leap of faith, right? You're looking over the edge of the chasm and you need to just put all your energy into it and hope you don't go splat on the bottom. I'm not that kind of thinker. I don't think that I could have done this if it had required a full leap of faith for me. I, at the time, was working for an employer who I came to and said, I'm thinking about doing this, but I don't want to leave you in the lurch. I had built their marketing program pretty much from nothing for them. So it was going to be handing over the keys to the kingdom was going to be a pretty involved process. And I said, I'd like to stay involved and kind of help you guys with that transition. It sounded really selfless on their end, but really I was trying to keep myself partially employed while I set up my own agency. And for them, that worked really well. And I was able to have about 3 months, I think, it seems right, of part-time employment with my previous employer while I built my book of business. And all this said, I didn't even approach them about this idea until I had a couple of clients in the book of business. So it was definitely a slow transition. And I would just encourage anyone who it feels super daunting to think about what the baby steps could be, because that made it a lot more feasible for me.
Right. Okay. No, that's a great tip there. Now, I suppose, what is it that you're actually doing for your clients? Because creating compelling content can mean a lot of things. It can be writing copy, it could be creating video, it could be producing digital experiences. What area do you specialize in?
Yeah, that's a great question. So I'm kind of in this tricky spot where content means everything you've just said, broad form content in general in marketing. But it also means longer form written content as kind of juxtaposed against copywriting, which is shorter form, like taglines for things. Content, web content, or marketing content that I work in is more things like web page content, blogs, press releases, things that are written, but they're not like the short little snappy taglines that you think of oftentimes when you think about marketing writing. I have been approached multiple times about writing copy, and I don't know if I'm not good at it or I don't like it or both, but it's not my sweet spot. So for me, for Jot, content means creating pieces that are a lot more, the emphasis is more on education than persuasion. And that's really where I found my niche. And I think it's why I enjoy writing health and lifestyle pieces so much, is because as I'm educating the reader, I also get to educate myself. So I always have the opportunity to be learning new things, and that makes my job really exciting.
Right. I'm going to ask you something that may seem like a really stupid question, right?
There are no stupid
Would
questions.
not, why wouldn't someone have someone with their, existing marketing team write the content for them? Why would they actually go out and find someone like you?
That's a great question. I primarily work with small to mid-sized enterprises. So these are, companies that have a marketing staff or at least a single marketing person on staff, but they may not have a fully developed marketing team. That's primarily where I step in and bridge the gap. That said, I just finished working with a very large scale corporation that simply didn't have, they had a deadline approaching, their internal team was all tied up, and they needed to meet this deadline. So they brought in me as outside help. It's sort of a mixed bag, but the luxury of, having my own agency and functioning as a contractor is I can provide that flexibility where businesses need it.
Right. No, that makes, I suppose, total sense. Now, in terms of kind of expectations of your clients and how they're measuring your performance, so someone might be, doing kind of paid advertising, and it's quite clear the metrics are you put $1 out and you try to bring $1 and more in, and you can
Right.
see results from day one. What kind of KPIs and what kind of expectations, do your clients usually have of you?
Yeah, so that varies from client to client, but that's a great question. And it's an interesting challenge for me as a contractor because I don't necessarily always get that inside look. A lot of
Right.
times I'll turn over the content and I don't know how it performed from there. I do have a few clients that I'm lucky enough to kind of work more closely with, and I can see instances where, I wrote a blog for them. It was educational, but it linked to a service or product of theirs. The clicks directly to that then translate directly to sales. So I can, in some instances, see how the content is directly generating revenue. But a lot of times with content, it's a more of a branding effort
Right.
than it is necessarily a revenue generation effort. And I think increasingly, I mean, COVID has really uh, brands have really been seeking authenticity through COVID. They've really looked for a way to connect with consumers when we've lacked storefronts in which to do that. And I think that from a branding perspective, consistent quality content that's educational and useful to your audience, even if it doesn't necessarily drive a dollar, means something to today's consumers. And I think
Mhm.
brands are increasingly realizing that. And that's great news for content writers like me.
No, that's absolutely great. Now, let's go back to the main topic of the show, which is building a book of business. How did you start building your book of business before you kind of made that jump?
I get this question all the time, and I wish I had a more succinct answer, but I don't. I looked everywhere. And I mean, I took gigs off Craigslist, I posted on my Instagram, I was all over the place. Um, Now I'm only a few years in. I'm not doing any sales. All of my business is coming to me through referrals. So just a word of encouragement for anyone who feels
Amazing.
daunted about everything I'm about to say. But I think the biggest thing for me was building a portfolio. I would absolutely recommend building a website because it's one thing to go to a business when you don't have much to show for yourself yet and say, hey, hire me, I'll do a great job for you, and not have anything to show for it. If you can show a little bit of what you can do, even if it's something, projects you did in college or things you've done for previous employers, having some sort of portfolio in place makes a really big difference. It made a huge difference for me. Also, business cards, they're kind
Mhm.
of, I know, on the way out, but as a contractor, it makes you look extremely legitimate to have a business card in your hand that you can hand to people. I think my biggest uh, sources of quality clients who I'm still working with a few years later, who, never missed paying an invoice and who consistently have good quality projects for me. That's really meant two things. First, I would absolutely recommend Googling your industry. And I know it's weird, but for content writing, for example, there's a website called ProBlogger, I'm pretty sure, and it has a job board. And I got a couple of really great clients in the very beginning off that job board. I'd also recommend LinkedIn Profinder. There are all these resources out there of people who are looking for people like you who are seeking out this kind of work. You're not starting from nothing here. People are already seeking these kinds of services.
But how do you stand out there? I mean, with jobs boards, we
Yes,
get this all the time. You know, there's hundreds of people on these jobs boards. How do you get the attention of your prospect?
that's a great question. I think the portfolio makes an absolutely huge difference there. I also think, this has been huge for my client retention, and I don't really know a better way to say it other than be personable, be someone who, you know, when people are hiring someone, they're making two decisions. I think you're competent enough to do the work, and do I want to work with you? So the portfolio helps you prove competence, but on the other hand, you really, to stand apart, you want to look like someone people want to work with. So that could mean injecting a little humor into a cover letter. Yeah, exactly. Make them kind of excited about like, oh, this person seems fun to hang out with in a professional sense. And I think that can really help differentiate you from the assumed thousands of other cover letters they're getting saying, here's me, here's the work I do, hire me, thanks, bye. You need to engage a little bit deeper level. And to that end, I think researching the brand, especially if you're in a marketing space, and saying, hey, here's what really stood out to me about what you're doing. I get your vision. I could help communicate your vision. I think that makes a big difference.
Okay. And I mean, obviously, when a lot of people are starting out, I hear this all the time, they get prospects who are trying to lowball them on pricing, and they want kind of at the bottom of the barrel clients, if you like. Did you have any of that? And if you did, how did you tackle that?
Yes. Especially freelance writing is really a saturated space because it doesn't require much, really, right? You need a laptop and like a loose grasp of the English language, really, and you can do it. And I think that's why a lot of these like Fiverr job boards where people are getting paid like a half a cent a word, there's a market for that. I think for starters, it's a lot easier to justify a client paying you more if you have a portfolio. So you may need to take, and I did take, some lower paying jobs in the beginning, but also know your worth, because as soon as you start setting pricing, it's hard to go up. I have a client I started working with in the very, very beginning that I bill an hourly rate. And at the time, when I started working with them, I thought I was charging them such a high hourly rate. I was like, oh my gosh, this is going to be my best client ever. 3 years later, I'm kicking myself because in our yearly negotiations, I'm like, do you think they'll go for a 70% rate increase, or is that just not realistic? So you can kind of work yourself into a hole by accepting too many low paying gigs. On the other hand, you do sort of need to build up your portfolio. I would definitely say Reddit forums were great for me in the beginning, as far as if you can find a subreddit of people in a similar space to you, to kind of get a feel for what is fair in the industry. So you're not taking jobs well below industry standard. That can help. But also know that if you start out getting paid a little less than you'd like, you can work your way up from there. I certainly have.
Right. And apart from these jobs boards, were you doing any like kind of cold emailing, cold calling, harassing people on LinkedIn, or
Yes, yeah, definitely. Yes, and I still, every once in a while, if I see a brand I really like, I'll shoot off a cold email. I think that I didn't, to be honest, get a lot of business from, I even did cold calling. Like I was really going for it. I didn't generate a lot of business from that, but I do kind of, you never know what's going to stick. Some of my best clients have come from like an Instagram story I published when I was slow, being like, hey, I'm available for work if anybody wants me. And you just never know where you're going to have success. So I don't think it hurts. I also think that cold calling and cold emailing really helps you get your elevator pitch ready. And that practice alone is kind of invaluable, because then if you are in a room with someone who's saying, oh, my business actually does have a content need, you're ready to go in and say, oh my gosh, that's great. Here's what I can do for you. And that can be the difference maker. So I hate cold calling and cold emailing, but I do think it's a valuable asset.
Right. And when would you say is when you actually had your big breakthrough?
That's a really good question. I kind of feel like I had it from the very beginning. I was surprised how much momentum I was able to generate once I just really started trying. It's something I thought about doing for, I don't know, honestly, probably a decade. And I was
Oh,
surprised
wow.
once I
Okay.
just started trying how much was out there for me. I don't think, I mean, of course, there are like revenue like in my second year, I really wanted to hit 6 figures of revenue, and I did. And that was definitely like, I went out to dinner and I celebrated. But I think when you're building your own business, there aren't those like, there's no promotion, you know, it's all you, and you're in it every day, and it all feels like small baby steps towards a goal, and it is. But I think it's important to celebrate those small victories and to kind of remember why you're doing it, and also helpful to juxtapose it against people who are stuck in an office all day with a boss they don't enjoy. You know, I don't think I had any single big moment of epiphany like this is it, but I do every day wake up grateful that I get to do what I do.
Yeah, well, you've made marginal gains and you've made enough progress. So when you went from, I suppose, 5 figures to crossing 6 figures in your second year, what were you doing differently in your second year?
I think at that point it really just came down to having more of a portfolio to show for myself, and that enabled me to charge higher rates. I think there's an opposite correlation between how much I've worked and how much money I've been making. In the beginning, I was working all the time, which I think is how you have to start. I don't think there's any getting around that. And making like, you know, matching my salary at my previous job, which is exciting. I mean, that's what I set out to do initially, and that was really great. Now I'm kind of in a space where I have fewer clients, but they're better paying and more consistent, and I'm able to really protect the time I put it. You know, back in the day, I'd have 6 clients lined up for the day. I'd be jumping from project to project to project, and now I can kind of finish a piece, take a break, get out of that headspace, get in the headspace for the next brand I'm going to write for. And I think that, you know, helps improve the quality of my work, so then I can charge more for it. But I don't think there's any way to get there without putting in the hard work of building up a portfolio and also kind of building up a name for yourself. Like all the referral business I get now makes a big difference for me.
Right. So in your current setup, is it just you doing the writing, or do you have other people assisting you? What does your actual business look like?
No, this is a great question, because I'm kind of at a crossroads right now of like, what's next? And the next theoretically should be that I hire a team, but I've worked for marketing agencies and managed teams of writers before, and writers, we're not the easiest people. So I don't have a lot of interest in that. Yeah, I don't really know what the next move is for me. I'm in fact thinking the place I'm at now, like maybe it's a different venture, maybe it's not taking Jot any further. I understand the draw of building out a team and going bigger, and I also understand that there is a possibility that I could scale this to something I could sell, which would be really great. But that would require having other people reliant on me. And it's one thing to be reliant on yourself for income and feeling a little iffy about it, but it's an entirely other thing to have people reliant upon you, and to have one of my biggest clients just got bought out, and I don't know what that's going to mean for me. That's a little stressful. That would be significantly more stressful if I had a team of people under me. So, you know, I'm at that crossroads weighing out that decision and not really sure where I'm going to go from
that
here.
makes total sense. I was speaking to someone the other week, and they're really grateful they didn't have a huge team, because the pandemic would have meant
COVID, I know.
lay people off, right? But because the team, everyone, you know, is all right. This business of that you keep on talking about, right? There's a lot of people out there who are doing work, and you know, for different clients, and they're complaining that they don't get enough referrals. You know, what are you actually doing? Are you doing something proactively to get the referrals, or are you that good that they magically come to you?
I think it helps that locally I'm one of the few established content writers. So definitely most of my referrals come local, and honestly, the local
define local. Are we talking about a town here of like?
That's a great question. I'd say more a county-ish, like county and maybe a little bit of the neighboring counties on both sides, maybe like 100-mile radius. I'm kind of the girl people call, maybe, hopefully.
Right.
But it also has happened that a couple of my the brands for whom I was writing initially are part of families of brands.
Right.
And that happens a lot in the editorial space, you know, where you'll have like one large publishing house and they're publishing all these websites that are household names. And I, as a writer writing for them for a year, didn't even realize that there was this whole family of brands going on. But eventually, I proved myself enough that the editor for whom I was writing would say, hey, our sister brand is looking for someone to write this piece. Would you be interested? And then assuming you handle that project well, they might be interested in hiring you for another piece, and it can kind of snowball from there. So I'd say definitely it's helpful to keep in mind that you don't know who's looking at your work, and it's never worth it to phone it in. If there's a project that you are so unexcited about that you would be tempted to do a poor job on it, my advice, assuming you don't desperately need the money, is pass, because you never know who's going to see that piece and what it could translate into, either opportunities you get or a missed opportunity in the future.
Right. So, if you had to start again from scratch, if you had to move to a new town or a new county or a new city, what would you do differently from when you actually started a couple of years ago, or would you follow the same process through?
That's a great question. I think I would build my book of business similarly, but I would take my branding much more seriously in the beginning. I think that that's the opportunity I missed at the start. My website was literally kaciegoff.com. I was using just my normal Gmail address. Like, I didn't look legitimate to anyone else, and it's very hard to ask a business to pay you a lot of money if you don't look legitimate. I think taking my branding more seriously from the get-go would have helped me go further faster.
Okay, no, that makes total sense. And I think a lot of solopreneurs often forget, or they neglect the importance of personal branding, which
Absolutely. It's
huge.
easy to forget when it's just you, you're like, oh, well, I'm the brand, so what does it matter? But it does matter.
That's awesome. So, I mean, we're very quickly running out of time, and it's been a great conversation that we've had here.
Yeah, this has been really fun for me. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you. Now, for people who are watching this, who are at that crossroads that you were at a couple of years ago, what's the best advice you can give them?
I think the best advice I can give, two pieces of advice. First, start trying. Start looking on Craigslist. Start pinging your contacts who might be interested. See what's out there for you, because you never know. And I was amazed once I started looking how much I found. Secondly, would be to set goals that are realistic. Every quarter when I first started out, I had a goal, and I said, if I hit this, then I can keep going. And if I don't hit this, I should probably be looking for a real job. And knowing I had those, and knowing I was kind of tracked out to scale in a way that was sustainable and would make sense and wouldn't leave my husband having to pay all my bills, was really helpful for me. So, I mean, it doesn't necessarily, some people aren't as like, I'm very type A, so I'm very goal driven. Maybe it's not goals for you, but just something so you can see the road ahead and understand what that would look like for you, and then kind of measure your progress against that. Obviously, if you don't hit your first goal, it doesn't mean give up, but it gives you a place to evaluate against, so you can kind of see where you're at, where you're headed, and if it's a path you want to keep walking down.
Yeah, that's a great piece of advice. And whether you want to call it a goal or a milestone or something that, I suppose, maps out your journey. That's a great piece of advice. I think many people look at goal setting and they think of it as one of those things that these new age NLP obsessed folk do. But I think, if you're going to build any business, you need to have your strategy with the right milestones. On that note, Kacie Goff, thank you very much for your time.
Thank you so much. It was such a pleasure to talk to you today. I really enjoyed this.